Jodi, thank you so much for joining me. I really am very, very excited to have you on Uncover Wealth Radio.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
So I know that in my business, when I started to take on more employees and things, leadership was something that I found so incredibly difficult. And it's something that I have had to spend a lot of time kind of learning about.
Yeah. And it's the worst of the worst. I mean, it's next to like parenting. I think your parenting and any form of leadership are just this, like if you really want to dig into some hardcore personal development work, have children or lead a thing.
Or do them both at the same time.
And my goodness. Yeah. And marriage. I guess I'd put marriage there too. Those three things are like the crucible of grinding out anything, any work you have left to do, you will have to confront in one or all of those three environments.
Completely agree. And so, I've spent a lot of time, particularly in this last year, really kind of trying to understand who I am as a leader and work on myself in that capacity. But I know that you believe that there are some myths around leadership that are making leadership even harder than it needs to be for us.
So much harder. So much harder. So I'm going to hit that. But before I mention this, I do want to say one thing about why, at the core of why I think leadership is so legitimately so difficult, is because of the infinitely long list of places where opposite things are true at the exact same time.
Yes.
And so just to hit on the one that you just said, because the only way through it is to be able to embrace both of them, because every time something screws up in your business, it is super important to say, okay, what was my part in this? Did I not lead well? I would never, ever, ever halt someone from that kind of exploration. It's super important. And leaders who don't do that are not good leaders. And at the exact same time, it's not just you. There's another person on the other side of that seesaw. And you can't take every warble in your business and then shift yourself because of that. It's almost like chasing the stock market kind of thing. Like there's a certain part of it where you have to make some decisions about who you are as a leader, which parts are healthy, stick to those, and not always be looking to the latest crisis to cut and snip yourself into some different shape, because that's also not the answer. Sometimes that person just brought something to the table that also wasn't healthy. And so it's not always you. And that discernment of how much of this was me, how much of this was somebody else, that discernment between those two truths is really hard, really, really hard.
So really hard.
Yeah. Well, but that ties right into the myths. I mean, I think all the myths that I might hit on fall under one mega myth, I think. Like whoever said it's lonely at the top, it was like the worst moment in leadership history that got written into some stone tablet somewhere. Because I don't know. I know why it feels that way, because there are many, many legitimate reasons that there are less people you can talk to about things. You can't go to your employees about your insecurities. You can't go to your employees about other employees. Both, those are bad. Those are bad. There's all sorts of reasons that there are less and less people. You don't necessarily want to talk to your investors about things not going well. There's just a lot of reasons why there are less people to talk to and an increasing amount of uncertainty. And that creates this tinier and tinier room where it can feel very lonely. So I get that. I get that it can be lonely at the top, but it shouldn't be. And so all of these other things that I think kind of fall under it are symptoms of this underlying sort of fantasy we have that's okay that it be lonely at the top. And so, whether you have a leadership team that you're leaning on for certain things, I mean, a great deal of my work is, some of it's decision support, some of it's almost like business therapy, just to talk through the emotional roller coaster of kind of those discernment issues we just talked about, of how much of this is me, how much of this is them, do I need to change, are they just the wrong people, do we have the wrong business model, is it just the economy, how much of this is the pandemic? I mean, it's like it's a lot, and you can't necessarily yank your leadership team around through those emotional things. So I get that there's less people to talk to, but So a couple of the biggest myths, I think, that really get people in trouble.
Mm.
One of them is a perception that leadership is about knowing the answers. I will often hear clients want to use our time to figure out all the answers to things so that they can go back and announce to their people what the decision is or how to handle it. And sometimes I can feel like a one-trick pony or I don't know, almost like I'm one of those psychics who's pretending to do one thing, but it's really, I'm just like working this thing because I have this question that I always ask them. And so often it is the answer, and it's not just to that problem, but many, many of their upcoming problems, like a muscle if they build. And I'll say, well, have you asked your team? Have you talked to your people about what might be a way to handle this? And often they have not, because they feel like they have to have all the answers. And again, opposite things true at the same time. As a leader, you can't not have any answers. Yeah. I mean, it's your job to provide some structure or some amount of framework, but it is so powerful to come to the table asking the right questions or surfacing the right questions, getting your team involved. This is the part where it's so interesting. I didn't realize at this time, of course, because it was the only place I had ever worked, but I grew up professionally. My professional childhood right out of college was at a company where they did this very well. They would pull us in and ask us to weigh in on like bigger firm direction leadership decisions. And honestly, hysterically at the time, I thought that was because they felt like they needed our advice. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh, you were like growing our capacity to think like leaders. I was like, oh, they really need our input. They did not. But well, actually, that's not entirely true, because sometimes the things we could see from our vantage point was really useful to them. They were like, oh, I didn't realize that person was, super valuable or not super valuable. We didn't realize that. So we definitely brought some things to the table. But not only did that help them because it distributed the weight of the uncertainty and the confusion, but it also developed us as people who then knew how to think more broadly. And that's the interesting thing. One of the things I most hear especially out and about talking to entrepreneurs and leaders of divisions and parts of companies is like frustration that their people aren't thinking the way they need them to think, right? Like, oh, I don't, like, my people just don't realize that this impacts this. Like,
why are they not using their brains? Why are they just not using their brains?
Right, exactly. If they would just think, or they don't care, or there's all these like suppositions about they're not bringing their A game to the table. And I'm like, well, do they see what like, do they know that that's impacting that? Well, no. I'm like, well, how are they supposed? It's almost like blindfolding them and then expecting them to like walk across town to another destination and being frustrated that they couldn't find their way. And like, they don't see what you see. They're not feeling what you feel. I get that it feels noble or whatever to be shielding them from uncertainties or fears or problems or barriers or whatever, but you're not doing anyone a service if you're the only person who can see the icebergs and then you're expecting your people to navigate the ship and not hit them, right? So it can be, and again, I know it sometimes can feel confusing. I'm like, except when, again, that doesn't mean you're walking in and telling them the sky's falling every 5 minutes, because that also, there's a certain psychological safety. But wrapping more people into the decisions you're trying to make and just asking their thoughts. There's a fear I hear quite often that, well, if I ask them their opinion, then they'll expect their answer to be what I do. And I would really encourage people to let go of that. I'm not saying that won't happen, but especially if you're doing it all the time, if you make it a matter of practice instead of this, I have a teenage daughter, and she'll come in and say, do you like the red or the blue? And if I say the blue, she's like, I think I'm going to do the red. Like, if that's what you create with your people, then that could be like, why do you even ask me if you're just going to do the opposite? So maybe not that, but wrapping them into the bigger conversations will make it easier on you and lighten the load. So not being afraid to wrap people in, which ties into another sort of insecurity that I hear in leadership quite a lot, which is I'll hear people say, and it's almost like having the answers, but like the action form of feeling like you have to the answers is, well, I know my people are really busy. I don't want to, I'm not good at asking for help. And this one kind of makes me even giggle right on a call when somebody says, I don't like asking for help. Is like, if you think about it for a second, like by definition, leadership is basically coordinating help. Like that is your job as a leader, is to coordinate and channel help. And if you imagine this is the big trap that I think people don't always understand, is if you feel like it's all your job to figure out and do, that's not leading. No. That's being an individual contributor. And that has serious limitations. There's only so much you can do. Yeah. So that's a huge one that, and it's, I mean, I do want to take a quick pause to mention, you can be shaking your head yes to all these things and saying that makes perfect sense. I 100% agree. I'm not even beginning to pretend that makes it easy to just turn around and like, from now on, I'll ask for help.
Yes, it's like, oh, okay, I'll do that tomorrow.
Right, exactly. Okay. Yeah. The place that I see that, a really great place to work on that topic, though, I think is anywhere where you feel like there's a hard conversation is sort of stepping back from imagining that's a hard conversation. There's a fantastic book by, I think her name is Susan Campbell, where she talks about communication. That if you are trying to communicate something to someone in a way, either so that they react in a certain way or don't react in a certain way, that is not communication. That's control.
That's control.
You're trying to, like, if I say it just this way, you'll be really happy or not be super mad. And that's not possible. I think we have all gone out of our way to like mentally script out a conversation. And I think we all know it never goes that way. So kind of letting go of that and just speaking to what is, and only the part that up until the part where you start making assumptions or guesses about their intent or their come from or any part of that. So, I've just noticed that it seems like, this is what I'm seeing. What do you see? And again, asking that question, it ties back to that feeling like you have to come in and say, well, I've noticed it this way. So clearly you've decided that Bob isn't blah, 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 blah. Well, no, that's
not clear.
That's not what's going on. And the minute you do that, people then feel like you don't understand them and you get a very different kind of conversation. So it's a great place to practice. It's like a double whammy of making hard conversations easier and practicing I don't have to know the answers to start a conversation. I can just go in and say, wow, it seems like we're butting heads a lot lately. Have you noticed that? There's a story from actually before I started doing this work 100% professionally, it was in my, not that I was doing it unprofessionally before.
I know.
Maybe I was. Before I left my corporate work to only do this work as a business, I had a colleague come in with a 2-page legal pad, single-spaced like list of ammunition against someone who worked for him that he was like, she's jumping at me at meetings and she clearly thinks I'm not the right, it's just all this stuff. And I said, well, just try this. Like, you can take your legal pad in, but like put it on your lap. Just tell her what you've noticed and just see what she says. Like, give her a chance to weigh in on if she's noticed it, if she has any thoughts. He came back out like 8 minutes later and he was like, I'm so glad I didn't tear into her. He just said, it seems like we're butting heads. And she burst into tears and said, I know I've been meaning to talk to you, but I feel like such a jerk. And she'd had this like horrible stuff going on in her personal life. She'd gotten married, and ever since they moved in together, they were fighting, and she was just a wreck. And she said, I know I snapped you, and I felt so bad. I haven't even been able to talk to you about it. And they had this great conversation, and she's like, I'm working through it. I promise I'm aware of it. And it was like 8 minutes, and it was over. And he's saying, can you imagine what would have happened, knowing how she's feeling, if I'd gone in there and just torn into her? Like, she never would have shared what was really going on, and we never would have had a professional relationship that we could have had going forward. And so it's just an easy story of how to just go in and say like, hey, noticing this thing, what do you notice? What do you think?
I really like that.
Yeah, so that's one place, because I think avoiding hard conversations, like leaders know that they're in charge of the hard conversations, but they find
that doesn't make it easier. So
no, and they don't. Well, I think they do get easier. I don't think they ever get easy, especially the really, really hard ones. But even when it comes to like letting someone go, like not being afraid to just be fully honest, which means not just saying the hard things, but also saying like on the critical side, but also saying like, and this is really hard for us because we like you, like, so I think there's some value there. But the other thing I really want to touch on that gets a little, again, it's one of these discernment things, is the myth of hustle, and just like grinding yourself into the ground as an entrepreneur or a leader. And, obviously with your show, the value of financial capital. I think what gets overlooked is this like energetic capital. And as entrepreneurs, as leaders, again, there's a part of that I would never want to take away, which is this at least low level discontent and want for things to be better and improved. I don't know that you can be an entrepreneur or a leader without some amount of that, like, I can make this better. We can do more. We can stretch further. So you have to have that.
Yeah, you have to have that element of drive.
Yes. Because if you're like, everything's great the way it is. You have to be able to be there sometimes, like to say like, okay, this is I think of it sometimes in two ways. In the long term, like you don't just climb Everest, you climb to base camps and you like spend the night and you acclimate and you kind of get there and then you climb again. So taking those spurts. In the shorter term though, again, in my work, I talk a lot about decision support. And the reason I don't talk about it outwardly like if I met someone at a networking thing as being partly business therapy and whatnot, is that in the moment, when you are just spinning your wheels or overwhelmed in a moment, trying to make a decision, and you just feel like sometimes you're not even sure which decision you have to make first. It's just this like blah kind of feeling. It always feels like you have a decision to make. And sometimes you do, because sometimes, I don't know, I guess my version of I see dead people is when someone's talking to me, there's one way it feels if down deep, like they're dragging their feet because down deep, they know it's a bad idea. And they're just not ready to say, I can't do that thing, or I need to end this thing, or I need to leave it. So that's one version of indecision. Like another version of indecision is down deep, I know it's a great idea and it's just scary.
And I'm petrified.
It is like bone chillingly terrifying to make this leap. And that's a very different kind of situation. But there's a third situation that I don't think anyone ever comes to the call recognizing might be where they are, which is that they are so exhausted or so depleted, especially this year, this time in the world. I don't even think people necessarily feel exhausted. In fact, sometimes there's this really weird thing I'm seeing now that I've never seen before, where people are trying to sort out this cognitive dissonance of I'm doing less than I ever have, and yet I have less energy, or I'm more tired's not even the right words. Like I'm sleeping like 8 hours. I don't have the words for it myself. I know exactly what they're talking about. I'm like, it's a really weird feeling we have right now. Some friends of mine were saying like, we just feel stupider. I feel like I'm less good at everything, just a little bit, like it takes me a little bit longer to figure. I was laughing yesterday. I had to do this complicated thing to return something I had ordered, but it was like multiple steps. You had to print 3 copies.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I'm like, I'm smarter than this.
Yeah, it's like, but I still can't process this somehow.
This shouldn't feel hard. I'm a little bit worried. But back to the main point here. Sometimes when we're on a call, they're just so depleted that I've often joked, like, you couldn't decide between a hamburger and a cheeseburger right now. And while the last thing that it feels like you could do right now is either rest or take a break or, just disconnect, even for like an hour or 3, not, it doesn't have to be a week's vacation or whatever. And I'm seeing more and more of this since nobody's getting vacations. Like even if you say, I'm not going to work for the next week, you're still right there in your house looking at the same. I mean, nobody is getting that renewal that they normally get, even on a daily basis, not to mention an annual basis. And so, I say that I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I'm enough of a neuroscience nerd to know that your brain literally needs downtime in order to be smart. It needs alpha waves, which are the relaxation waves, to have like a new idea, like an insight, to be creative. And so I have often on those calls said, look, you need, like, how can you get this right now? Well, I can't go away and for a month. I'm like, what can you do? Like, we're not going to talk about this issue again until you've had until
you turn off your phone and go for a walk in the woods or whatever that might be.
Oh, really funny you say walk in the woods. I feel I loved this story because I felt like it gave me quantitative evidence of exactly what we're talking about. Back in August, we did a little family vacation kind of thing, but it was what I didn't really think through all the way was because we really just went to a remote cabin and did what we were doing here, but there. But we checked in on Monday. We checked out on Friday, check in on 3:00 on Monday. We had to be out at 10 on Friday. I'm like, oh, that's not a week. That was 3 days. And so it was lovely. It helped a little bit, but I didn't reset. And so I came back to work on Monday, had calls all day Monday, just wasn't feeling great. Tuesday morning, a friend/client called me and said, hey, it's been raining for weeks. It's going to rain for like another 2 weeks. Do you want to go for a hike today?
Nice.
And at first I said I couldn't because in my mind, I'm like, I've just
been off. I need to do all this stuff.
Gone for a week. I've only been back for a day. I have so much to do. I'm overwhelmed. I can't possibly walk out of my house for 3 hours right now. I just can't. And then he just kept hounding me because he's like, it's going to rain for like another 2 weeks. I'm like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
So we went, and here's the funny thing that I feel like is evidence, because I love taking pictures. I take thousands of pictures all the time. And when we got home, we were gone for 3 hours on this hike.
Nice.
When I got home, I looked at my pictures, and it was so interesting because the first half of the hike, there were 2 pictures. And they were so boring because it looked like somebody said, while you're out, you must take 2 pictures of trees. Like just like snap. And then about halfway through, I started taking like a few pictures. The last hour of the hike, I took like 80 pictures. Wow. And they are some of my favorite pictures I've taken for a while. They're super interesting and creative. There's little like things that, just the stuff I love to take pictures of. And, that's not because the last hour of the hike was cooler forest.
It was more
the first. It's not like we got to the good forest in the last hour. And what's really important about it is the remainder of that week, I killed it. I got more done in the next 2 or 3 days than I had gotten done in months. And I looked at that camera roll and I was like, what we're seeing here is the wadded up piece of paper of my brain slowly unfolding back into its natural shape. And the thing that I think is most important about this is I just told you that story and I'm like preaching that talk and I still do the opposite.
Yeah.
I still grind down, and it comes back to why leadership can't be lonely is you need people around you who will hold up that mirror,
to say, let's go on the hike.
Yeah. Doesn't have to be a me. I mean, it can be a me. I'm that person for some people, but you must make sure that you have people around you that that you can not know the answers to things, that you can be vulnerable around, that will make you take a nap or go for a hike or play hooky for the afternoon. And they don't have to be the same person, but you need people around you who can reflect that back to you. Because a friend of mine once said, if you owned a golden goose, like a real golden goose that actually laid golden eggs, would you march it up and down the square in the rain until its feet were bleeding and it was so exhausted it couldn't see straight? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. You would treat it really well. And I think what we forget sometimes, that as leaders, that is what is needed of us. Like in those ways, we are that goose, and we have to be in our best shape. We have to be rested. We have to be creative. We have to be able to think with our best brain. And our brain needs rest, and our brain needs space, and our brain needs a lot of things that feel indulgent, but they are not. They're critical.
Yeah, I think that is such a difficult one for so many business owners, because
so hard.
And I think part of it comes as well from, when we set up our businesses and we are the only person that does all the stuff. And so it feels like we need to do it at that point to actually get things off the ground. And we almost forget that we can come out of that mode when we have support and we have help and we start asking for help more and all those things that actually that's what we should be doing, and that's what we're designed to do as leaders.
Well, and that's the thing though that I think is I mean, I often joke about business puberty of like, there are all these you are going to over and over and over again need new skills and things than the things that got you thus far. And it is going to be messy and awkward, and like everyone says, when I have because I work with all different size companies, and when I have somebody who's, I hear them saying like, oh, if I just like, I'm so close, as soon as I can hire my first person, everything's going to get easier. And I'm like, it is.
In some ways it will.
Except when it's not, because every solution comes with its own new set of problems.
It does.
But that's not. And I would say, if you can't embrace that and enjoy like, we have, new, then like maybe being a leader isn't for you, because that's never not going to be the case. But my team and I joke sometimes, like, oh, look, we have new problems. This must be progress.
Yeah,
because at least we're not just having the same old problems over and over again. So this must be progress.
Is a good thing. Yeah.
Right. Because every single thing is going to feel hard. So the way I navigated in my own brain, in case you can't tell, I'm a big metaphor person, so I make sense of the world. I think of, and I don't know if this is true for shorter or taller people than I am, but I'm like roughly 5'4".
Okay, me too. So we're good.
Okay. So you will understand this story. When I walk out into the ocean, the place where the waves break the hardest is usually right around, like when I'm deep enough in that it's right around sort of my mid trunk thigh. Like if I stand there, I will get knocked over. Like, that's where they're the hardest. And it's right at the place where I can't. Now, maybe if I was 6 feet tall, it'd be more like my knees and I'd be able to handle that.
Yeah.
Right. But at my height, I have to make a decision to either push through so I can get out into the big, swooshy, soft jump waves, or I have to back up to where those waves breaking aren't going to topple me over.
Yeah.
And I think over and over again, you need to have ways in your business cycle to be like, oh, I'm at one of those transition places. I either need to push through or back up a little bit. And both are fine. I've had clients say, I've had clients intentionally decide to shrink the size of their business because they grew it. And then they're like, this isn't fun anymore. I don't want to be in charge of 50 people. I had more fun and I made more money. You probably see this.
I do. Yeah.
More revenue does not mean more profit.
Yeah, completely. And that's something we work on all the time with clients. Exactly that.
Right.
If you're not having fun and you're not making more profit, what's the point?
Yes, there are easier ways to make that much money. Because people say like, I want to grow. And I'm like, do you want to grow? Like, do you want more? Like, growth and profit are often the opposite thing. So like, make sure you're asking the right question about where you're going. But that's the whole, and it's probably probably why you love having this podcast and doing the work that you do, is that dissection of, someone has an issue. And you're like, okay, let's pull that apart a little bit and dig apart, because that may or may not be the right question. And that's why going it alone is not you need people who can pick apart the problem as you can see it and help you get down to that like root cause issue. Because if you're putting your time into the wrong problem, that's a special kind of hell.
It is, because you don't get any further forward whatsoever as well.
No. And you spend a bunch of time working on a thing. You're like, there, we did it. And nothing gets better. And that's just sad.
Yeah, it is. It is for sure. I love those. Any more hustle myths? We spoke about hustle. Any more leadership myths that you have?
I think those are the big ones.
They're the big ones.
Yeah, those are really the big ones that I find get repeated over and over and over again. And I do think the one I don't normally talk about, but that I like that we wove in there is just being very cautious of the part of trying to figure out what's going on with your folks that delves over into assigning intent. Like the minute you are assuming intent, you are making every bit of fixing the problem harder until you've enrolled them in that conversation and gotten them to be participating in the conversation with you about what's going on and helping solve the problem. Last little thought on that. I think just because I find this really helpful, if you're having the conversation in a way that feels like you're sitting, whether you are or not, if the feeling of it of like we're sitting across from the table and I'm telling you what's wrong, and then you have to almost like you're scolding a child or something, that's rarely going to help as much as if you even metaphorically imagine that you're side by side and you're like working on a jigsaw puzzle. You wouldn't be like, this is a jigsaw puzzle, like I'm telling you a bunch of things and then expect you to respond. You'd both be kind of looking for the corner pieces and like, oh, here's a few straight pieces. You'd be solving the puzzle together, and coming at it that way will untangle your issues in your company 1,000 times faster than feeling like you're the person, like the parent who's telling them what's what.
That makes so much sense. That makes so much sense to me. So Jodi, you touched on kind of energetic capital. What is it? Why do we need to know about it as a leader?
So energetic capital is in the same way you have this, I think of it like a tank, really. And this tank that you have of available fuel and energy, and it ties in both like physical energy as well as emotions versus mental space. It's several different things, but they all show up as energy. Like whether you're physically tired, whether you're emotionally drained or distracted. I mean, so much of leadership is emotional.
Yes.
I don't think anyone wants to really pretend that it is, they're like, I got this. It's like, they pretend it's all science and math and spreadsheets. And it's so emotional. I mean, anyone who's ever lost like their favorite employee that they were like business in love with, that they're like, we're going to get married and have business babies. And it's going to be like, we're going to be together forever. And then they leave you. It's hard to not have abandonment issues out. You're like, oh my God, is that person? It's like, there's so much emotion. And so I don't think we realize how much that drains that capital from the tank. And so in the same way, you keep an eye on cash flow and reserves, because you know that if those things run out,
you got a problem.
Not that you can't be in debt, but you can't be in debt and always losing money all the time. And it's just, the reason I like attaching capital, the concept of capital to emotions and energy, is that it trues up the perspective that people have that isn't accurate, but people almost imagine that their energy is infinite and that their emotions can just keep taking a blunt force trauma to the chin over and over. And like, I can hack it. I can, and you actually can't. There's a fascinating sleep study from many, many years ago that, make it super short, they took two test groups, and they both slept like a good amount for some period of time. And then they broke them into two groups, and one group had to stay up for 36 hours straight. The other group, I know, right? The other group just had to switch from like 7 to 8 hours of sleep to just simply 6 hours of sleep a night. which I think for a lot of people, you're like 6 hours.
Like, that sounds pretty good.
That's still a good amount. It's not like 4.
Yeah.
And that was for like 10 days or something. And the fascinating thing is 2 parts. So because they did cognitive testing before and after they switched them into the 2 groups. The cognitive decline in their testing was pretty much close to the same. There was as much cognitive decline in being up for 36 hours as there was to just suddenly for 10 days only getting 6 hours sleep. Now, that's not to say 1 day of 6 hours sleep or 3 days is going to screw you up. But 10 straight days of only 6 hours had almost as much, right around the same amount of cognitive decline. So that's interesting enough. The part that I find most interesting and why I like this applying some amount of like math or science to someone's perspective of what's possible with their energy depletion is that the people who'd been up for 36 hours knew they were a mess. They're like, I'm not sure I should drive home. Like, I'm pretty groggy. They knew they were out of it. The people who had been up for 10 days, for 10 days and only had 6 hours of sleep, up for 10 days. That would be a very different sleep study. They reported almost no awareness of having less capacity for the cognition that they needed. And that to me is the scary part as an entrepreneur, that you can deplete yourself, you can be running on fumes and not even be aware of the fact that you're showing up at work with like 15 or 20 less IQ points than you could be. And that, I don't know about you, but like, I can't do that. Like I need all my points. I need all my neurons firing. And so you're actually putting I like upping the ante a little bit of taking it out of this column of like something noble that you're doing. Like, oh, I'm burning the candle at both ends. I'm super busy. Actually, you're abusing your company and you're neglecting it. And it's a really foolish, stupid, not honorable thing to do of being running at half-mast mentally. And interestingly, we were talking a few minutes ago about this time that we're in. So just to kind of wrap, years ago, I read about a thing where people who are in the constant stress of poverty, food insecurity and housing insecurity, and just always that constant low grade stress that level, never ever goes away, even for like 10 minutes, that cognitive decline is like 20 IQ points, just simply from the constant stress. And I have to wonder, I haven't seen this anywhere published, but I suspect that what many, many people are feeling in this time is very similar. The fact that like everything feels like a little bit stressful constantly. I suspect that we're all feeling a little, and what that says to me is it's all the more important that we take those hikes or pause and take a nap or take an afternoon off and disconnect, like whatever fills you up, fills that capital tank back up without judgment. Like, I don't care if it's play Minecraft or, or something really embarrassing you don't want to tell anybody else, like watching stupid Hallmark movies. Who cares? Fill that tank back up. You have a responsibility as a leader to keep your tank above the E mark.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating because there is no way I would attempt to, for example, go on a call with the client if I'd been up for 30 hours. But I would happily do it if I'd had 6 hours sleep for 10 days. So, I mean,
and you'd think you were great.
I would think I was fine. Like, I wouldn't have an issue. I mean, I've got small children. I feel like I've had less than 6 hours sleep for the last 5 years.
Exactly.
But that's just completely fascinating to me that actually that has that impact. And like you say, we're actually doing our business a disservice if we're turning up every day thinking we're okay when actually we're clearly severely depleted in that situation.
Yeah, because you're not even aware of it. You're not even cognizant of the effect that it's having on you. And so that's why we just have to be ever more vigilant about noticing where, and the way I do it is I've over the years, I've started to notice when, I'll be honest, one thing that I keep an eye out for, and it's part of why I agreed to the hike, not just because he was hounding me about the rain, but I've noticed that when it seems like I can't possibly take a break.
That's like the time you have to.
Yeah, like if I feel like, oh my God, there's like 8 tsunamis at me coming from 12 different areas, I'm like, okay, that's not sustainable. I can't fight my way through all. Like, I need to, at the very least, pause, take stock, decide what can wait, what can't. Like, I need to get some grounding before I forge into that battle, because I can't do all that depleted. I just can't. And I do actually. I framed 2 of the pictures from that hike that I did, and I put them up where I can see them, because that's also my own little trigger of like, are you interested in the things? I mean, this sounds terrible, but I've noticed that there have been times in my business where like someone will send me a referral for someone, like for something that's like right in my sweet spot, not like a referral for something I used to do or whatever. And if I'm like, oh, I'm like, oh, I'm tired. Like I'm tired at like a bone weary kind of tired. If it's almost the way actually, if you think about, I guess it's sort of like business depression, because one of the things that they say to watch out for in the mental health world for depression is when things that would normally bring you joy don't feel interesting to you.
That kind of apathy.
Yes, where you're like, ugh, normally I like that, but I don't even care about that right now. Those are the things and much like hydration, I think once it feels that way, like once you feel thirsty, you're already way dehydrated. If you get to those points where like, that client that you normally would have been thrilled to hear from,
you're like,
blah, you super need to deal with it. Ideally, you catch those things before they get to that point. Ideally, you just take enough breaks that you're always feeling like revved up and excited. But it's a particular focus right now, I think, that's extra needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we notice whether our leadership team and our employees have this energetic capital depletion as well? Because I think as a leader, that's going to be so important too.
Ever more now than ever. I mean, I even started talking about this in like, March and April and May, and I still I don't think anybody can remember it. And I have to keep remembering it, because I sort of predictively started saying, FYI, people they're not going to come in and say, gosh, I'm really feeling depleted and worried about so many things in my life right now that I don't feel like I'm at my top-notch best. It's not going to look like that.
No.
It's going to look like, again, I pull a lot of parenting metaphors in the same way that when my children were toddlers, when they threw a fit, like you don't necessarily address the fit. That if they're throwing a fit, they're probably hungry or tired, or they need their pants changed,
or they just need a cuddle.
They need a cuddle. Yeah, they just need like when you most want to like throttle them with your bare hands, they probably need a hug and a snuggle on the couch while you watch a movie or something. Like in that way, I think. I was sort of saying, like, people are going to be short-tempered or falling down on or not, missing meetings they've never missed before. Like there's going to be a lot of air quotes, bad behavior that may not be bad behavior. It may just be that people are not their best right now and they're doing the best they can, but it's messy and not great. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. And then the next week they'd be like, this person has been like, I'm like, oh, okay. And again, back to what we said in the very beginning, what that does not mean is like, none of these things are binary. That doesn't mean that because this is a challenging time, because your employees might be run down, that you need to just, unilaterally accept all bad behavior because people are having a rough time. No, because that is then abusive. That's asking the business to take the hit of all these. You can't abandon the employees for the business, and you can't abandon the business for the individuals who work for you. It's your job to balance both and meet the needs of both, and that is tricky. That is hard, but again, just having those conversations like, hey, I've noticed you've been missing some meetings, and
what's going on with you?
What's going on? Because if you dig into it, Sometimes you might find like, oh, well, it's just that both my kids have a break around like 10. And so when I'm trying to get on a 10:30 meeting, they've like come up to talk to me and I don't want to tell them just go away. And but you're like, okay, great. Let's not have that. Let's have that meeting at 11.
Yeah.
like a lot of times, I mean, that sounds like so overly simple, but I can't tell you how many times that if you can just give permissive space, like it's okay that we're having this problem. Let's just talk about what's at the root of it and see if it's something that we can get to the bottom of. Whereas, and frankly, these people don't tend to be my clients, but I have heard people in other conversations immediately make the assumption, well, that person's just using the fact that they get to work from home and they're eating bonbons, watching soap operas. I'm like, really? Really? I maybe that's true, but I don't think so. And if you really do have someone who would use this time to do zero work, like then they probably shouldn't be on your team anyway. But what I do know for a fact is that your entire workforce is not, like, you may have a bad egg, but most people are just trying to do their best, and it's hard sometimes. So to your question of how do you notice, I don't know if you can know if they're depleted, but I think what's important is just in that point where you're approaching assuming intent or what's causing a thing, just weave that in as part of what might be going on. Doesn't mean you have to just say like, well, I guess I can't address this because they must just be tired. But it does sort of, I think, swell the empathy around how you can solve a problem together, because it's not as like they're bad and have to be dealt with. It's like, no, they're in a tricky situation and maybe together we can solve it. Which, wow, can you just feel how different that feels if you're the employee?
It's just more empowering for everyone.
Yeah. And wow, and the loyalty they'll have if you didn't just come in and jump down their throat and you helped them solve a problem so that they can be better for the company. You get what you need. They get what they need. The company gets what it needs. There's so much power there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's easier because you don't have to like figure it all out and try to decide what carrot or stick will motivate them. Like, who knows?
And it helps your own stress levels too, because you're not angry and annoyed at them.
Yes. Oh, that is talk about business therapy. There's a number of calls I have where I'm like, talk me off the ledge, because right now I just want to like throttle everyone. And we kind of got to get down to like, well, is this warranted anger? Because if so, there's a thing to like get down to. And sometimes you're just being petty, and that's okay too. You're a human. You get to be petty sometimes, but you got to work. But that's yours to work through. Versus like a change they need to make. So
yeah, absolutely. So we've spoken as well about decision support, and you kind of mentioned decision support. So what tips can you share with us to make that process less daunting?
Yeah. So, I mean, one distinction I will make is decision support is 10 times more important for people who tend to be verbal processors. Like, for instance, my husband, not a verbal processor. Okay. He simply does not need to talk things through to get to the other side of an answer. Yeah. And I do. I do too. Yeah. And in fact, I had my very first assistant make this, like, as we worked together and figured things out, I had her begin the beginnings, and it's been added to since, of this like Karen feeding of Jodi Hume. Like, if you're gonna, like, here's what works, here's what doesn't, like, don't forget this, because I'm a specifically shaped human, and this is where I'll forget, and this is what works for me, whatever. And one of the things that she added that I never would have thought to add, it was actually a real challenge she and I had at the beginning, is I would start talking. I mean, I would have an idea. I'm like, oh, okay, I want her to do this. And it had just been in my head until that point. In my head, I thought it was all flushed out and fully baked. And you're laughing. You're like, I know this. Yeah, I know the moral of the story. I know the punchline. So I would go in the next day, be like, all right, here's what I want us to do. And I would start talking, and she would start writing. Yeah. And as I talked, I'd be like, oh, no, wait.
Yeah, I need to do that, but we need to sort that and hang on this thing over here.
Great idea. Like, before we do that, we have to like da-da-da-da-da. And I would see her pause, and she would sort of like close her eyes and clench her fist. And as we talked about that going on, it was super frustrating to her that she was already writing, and then I changed it because for her to like rewrite it, or then her notes didn't make sense, and it was hard for her to implement the things that I said because I had to talk it through. So she added to the list, like, let Jodi talk a while before you start writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or just
absolutely.
jot down basics, but don't feel like you're trying to like transcribe a step by step, because that's not, like, she's not there yet. Give her a minute to talk it through. So if you are someone who needs to talk things through to get to the end of a thing, then whatever it is, you have to have that place. And so whether it's, this is why I offer peer groups that so people can talk things through together. Obviously that's a huge part of my one-on-one work. But there are lots of ways to get that. It can be a friend. It can be, you know, there's lots of ways you can, some people can do it by themselves, just sitting in a room talking. I can't. I just need at least some human. They don't even have to say anything. That's the weird part. Like,
I'm the same. We'll have discussions, and my husband will say to me, "Do you want me to? Are you talking to me, or are you?" And I'm like, "No,
just sit there.
I'm just talking. It's fine."
Right.
Like, okay.
Right. So for me, like, there's like, it's okay to be a verbal processor. Like, if that feels, I know some people feel some like weird, I don't know, shame is a bit of too strong of a word, but whatever kind of like low grade shame is, they're like embarrassed that they have to talk a thing through to get to the end.
I think people sometimes feel like they must be like, not stupid either, but they feel like, does this mean, you know, are people going to think I'm daft having to speak this through?
Right. Well, I'll share, like, when that story I was telling about my first assistant, it made me feel, embarrassed, like I felt flaky or something. Like I felt because that's how it felt to her, and that I was all over the place, and that I was just changing my mind. And I'm like, but I'm not. I'm making a thing better. So anyway, but I think that's why. So you have to find some ways and places that you can process the way you need to process, and this feels ever more important now, since I think, with people working remotely, they may not even notice that what they're missing is that like accidental verbal processing that you have randomly with other people, because it just happened and you didn't even know it was there. And I think a lot of the things that we are missing and mourning and like have almost like vitamin deficiencies on in the world were invisible to us. And so we don't even know that that's what we're missing. So even if you have sort of a vague feeling of something's not working, it might be that you need more verbal processing time. And so try it, find someone to like talk things through with and see if it helps.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Jodi, this discussion has been absolutely fascinating. I have absolutely loved every single minute. I feel like we could talk for another 4 hours.
Probably.
But I might fall asleep at that point. So, Jodi, why don't you tell everyone where they can find out a bit more about you and where they can connect with you?
Yeah, I put a couple different things on one page to make it really easy. So if you go to meetingclarity.com, there's two main things there that I would point you to. One is you can get a link to the podcast I have each week, where we tell a story, usually not a business story. One of us with my co-host just tells a really great story. Sometimes it's a business story. And then from there, we bring it back to the real behind the scenes kind of what it's really like to run a business, the honest, real, sometimes very messy, the stories that we hear, the trends that we're seeing, to really touch on, because we really don't want it to be lonely at the top. And that was both of our ways of wanting to really expand that community of people who really hear what it's really like. So you can find that link there. The other thing is something I'm only offering to people who listen to these shows that I do interviews on, because I'm beta testing something. Right now, I do this work of decision support and having a place for conversations to go with a really small number of people. That's just always been my business model. And then I have groups and whatnot. But I am beta testing more of a just like almost the phone a friend model, where people could have access to somebody. It's not this big heavy thing of like, I'm going to hire a person who's going to be a monthly commitment. It's this light touch. Like, I have a thing I need to talk to and I don't have someone to talk it through with. So on there's a link for a 20-minute call with me.
Nice.
Two things I want to be super clear about. It is not a sales call. In fact, I literally will not discuss working with you on that call. If that's something that interests you, that will have to be a separate call. This is a cleanly free 20 minutes. I hate those like bait and switch things.
Yeah.
So this is just 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes to just talk a thing through. If you find it helpful, all I ask in return is just like a couple sentences about what is helpful about that, because we're building this beta test model of how could we offer this in a really light touch, accessible as needed on-call way. And so, so as not to get overwhelmed, I am only offering it to people who hear these shows for now. So
makes sense. Awesome. Jodi, we'll pop all the links in the show notes so everyone can have the links to that. So yeah, we'll get all that out to everyone as well. Like I say, it's been absolutely fascinating. I have absolutely loved talking to you. So thank you so much again for coming on Uncover Wealth Radio, and we'll speak very soon, I'm sure.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.